In fact, what I'm going to do first is to ask the speakers themselves if they've got a question of each other.
I think they're the most wonderful presentation I've ever heard, and they were so clear, I don't need to answer them.
Okay.
You're talking about your own area? Or?
You pass on that? Okay, in that case, I'll open it. And as I said, because John is the one who will need to leave, I think it may be. But also to the whole team, please, because it's important to actually hear the views from all our speakers.
It's a question for John as he's about to leave. John, one of the unique joys of living in London is our diverse communities and the languages that are spoken. One of the key themes we've been looking at today is warning and informing and communicating. I was wondering if you could comment on how the ambulance service in London is trying to overcome some of the challenges of dialect, language and paramedical staff actually communicating with their patients, and how that might relate to all of us in a warning and informing context.
Okay. It's reasonably, I say reasonably, it's reasonably easy on an individual basis with an individual patient. There are various ways of doing it. So each one of our staff, we've developed a flip card system whereby it's hold the book open and point to the language you speak and those sorts of things. And then standard phrases, where's the pain? So you point to the English bit, and underneath it is their language. So we have those on every vehicle, and every member of frontline staff has those. We also have the abilities, all ambulances, we do it via airwave or we do it via mobile phone network, is we have a connection into language line. So that's language line can either be in the control centre, so the 999 call is coming in, we can get an interpreter on the line to actually ask the questions and interpret for us. Our ambulance crews on scene can do that through their airwave set, so when they're talking directly to a patient, they have the ability to have an interpreter on the line. How you do it in a mass casualty situation is the challenge, and the only way you tend to do it is like most people do it, is they produce things in multiple languages. Sitting here, I don't have an answer, and it's probably something I would ask you to start looking at maybe. How do you communicate, especially in London, where you're quite right, it's an exceptionally diverse community and very many languages spoken. It's a great challenge. I don't have an answer to it. Individually, it's reasonably easy to do, if that's the right way to describe it. It's not easy, but it is much easier. How you do it in a mass casualty situation, very difficult.
Okay, I'm going to ask the other speakers if they have any thoughts, and then also ask if any of the audience have any thoughts. So consider that. So would anyone like to?
A suggestion is that I talked about having different groups, different messages, different whatever. One option would be, again, is to set up multiple messages, multiple voice messages in multiple different languages and send those out to different groups. We'd have to identify which groups we were sending it to, of course, but that comes back down to my subscription to identifying everybody that might be there. If they want to play with this game or not, 50p a month or 40p a month, join the ability to receive those, and those numbers for those ethnic minorities are in a specific group. A different group would be set up for a different language. A different group would be set up for a different language. So, and whether you're going to do it in a different language as against a text, again, as long as you can identify the different groups for the different language recipients, then that is a way of doing it, I would suggest.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I think, sorry, just to add, I don't think anybody's raised the challenge. Who's been on the tube recently? The next station is? Does it tell you in 15 languages? No, it tells you in English. And that banner says the next station is. It tells you in English. It's something that is a challenge for the future, and it's something we need to think about.
Yes.
I was speaking recently with a police officer who dealt with one of the, I think it was the Manchester bombing. They had a warning. They had a limited amount of time to evacuate a whole shopping centre, and they didn't use language at all. It was just a case of getting a whistle and blowing their whistles and directing people out of the building. And quite often it isn't language that we need, it is people to respond in a particular way. That's what we need to look at.
Yes, that's what I like. Lateral innovative thinking.
I think linked to that as well is use of symbolism as well and signage. There's pretty well kind of understood, widely recognised symbols that are used in various circumstances. Is how can we maximise some of the benefit or take some of the benefit of that in a different situation. So I think there's other things as well as written words, pictures, etc. can also help.
Absolutely, thank you. Right, now I'll open it to the audience. Yes.
I'll just add from my own experience, and I do research in emergency response both for the UK and internationally. This is always a question comes up of the language of the people involved in it. As far as I understand it, experience has shown that language is always less of a problem than emergency planners expect it to be, and that's mainly for two reasons. You think of the ethnic communities in the UK who may live, sort of use an example from that we use in the security world, parallel lives, where you have an Asian community who don't perhaps integrate very much with the white community around them. It may be the case that the elderly people in that community don't speak very good English, but actually they will normally, if they go out very much at all, will go out with younger members of their family. The children in families speak much better English than they do. And if you're in a situation in central London where you've got a lot of tourists, those tourists tend to be with a tour guide. It's actually not the case that people tend to go out on their own very much who really don't speak any English at all. But there certainly has, prior to the Beijing Olympics, we had a meeting with some of the civil defence organisations from China who actually came to ask RISI to give them some advice on if there was a major earthquake happen during the Beijing Olympics, how might members of the British public who were there as tourists react to that. And it was very much in terms of, did we think they would prefer to take advice from another member of the public, from soldiers, from police, how would they affect people in uniform as opposed to stewards who may have a tabard on but weren't in uniform. And I would go back very much to what David said, that it was pretty much you go that way and it's a visual thing. But the thing that I would say is certainly from my academic experience of this, people are always far more worried about language than the experience actually shows you need to be, because there isn't the language barrier that emergency planners perhaps perceive that there may be.
Great, thank you very much. One more question before lunch.
Can I just make one comment on that? I think it is important, you're right, but there is a very great difference between giving information and giving people the information to actually be able to do things to giving instruction. And there is a very great difference between that. And normally in those situations it's instruction. Do that. But if you're trying to get a message across to people, and one of the messages we were trying to get across on the 7th of July was, we're under great pressure, please don't dial 999. They are the sorts of things you have to think about, and about how you get into those communities and get those languages across. But I agree totally with what you said.
So as Margaret remarked, something that came through the talks was this conflict partially between your dedicated technology for communication and new emerging technology forms. And I would sort of put out the provocative thesis that in 5 to 10 years, you will need to give up on your proprietary technology and piggyback as much as possible on those existing things for a variety of reasons. And I've read an article about the US Army giving iPhones to soldiers because the technology is so mature and so much cheaper. The capability of the technology is progressing so fast. It's an exponential growth. And I like the story about the daughter of I don't know who told it, someone in the US who knew on Twitter something that the other guy didn't know. I think it was you, didn't know a week ago. And it's also the way that a young generation is behaving. So, 5 or 10 years, you get a young police officer, he'll be used to living on SMS, Twitter, and other stuff. So that sort of remark, that you will need to piggyback that technology and make application on that rather than build your own universe.
Okay. Jeff, is it directly related to this point?
I also thought that was a great example, and it occurred to me that instead of top-down specifying what equipment people should have, would you actually let people go and buy their own equipment?
I was at the ACPO conference last week, and up there we talked about the police have got it's a relatively new procurement program, which is called ISIS, which is the Information Systems Improvement Strategy. And that is pushing towards more joined up decision making, because obviously the individual police force, of which there are 43 in England, all the individual technology divisions of that can make their own decisions about what they want to do. Do they need it? Do they not need it? How do they implement it? Well, once they decide that there's a requirement for, in my situation, telecoms recovery, then the ISIS program would be that the first one to adopt it, big tick. Second one says, ooh. Then it'll go into the ISIS program, and then it will be that information will be disseminated to the other 40, in that case 41 police forces, to say, if you want to have this type of technology, go and buy it from these guys, because you'll be benefiting from a bulk discount ordering process, rather than this police force buying that police force buying that, and doing their own thing, and all of a sudden you haven't got joined up writing when it comes to the critical time. And I think that is key. It's a money-saving issue which has been driven, I can't say by this government, but I think Theresa May made the statement at the conference that she was going to be pushing hard on a more joined-up purchasing approach to try and streamline the number of leading-edge solutions which are out there.
Yes, coming back to the technologies that are out there already, there's certainly some development that's going on, such as items as the National Resilience Extranet, which we've been talking about earlier, where we're looking at a common capability. Now, we're putting information onto these formats, but we need to share it between agencies. Now, when you have agencies that are using different technologies, and the example I used earlier was Vector Command in London Fire Brigade, but it could quite easily be any other fire brigade across the country. London Fire Brigade using Vector Command technology, actually they can't pass information to the Met Police, let's say, who may be using something other than Vector Command. If we had a common standard that we pass information between systems that a supplier could adhere to, that would then give us the ability to pass information between these different systems and respect the fact that an organisation as large as the Met may have different requirements from a local authority that's working in a rural area, let's say. And I'm trying to choose two examples that won't necessarily conflict, because their budgets aren't going to be the same. So a small borough being able to take on the expense of buying into the capability that the Met have actually developed themselves and paid millions for potentially. Is it really reasonable to expect a smaller user to integrate? Well, if we had a standard that was owned publicly, so that it wasn't something a supplier provided for us, this would also give us the ability to reduce the amount of development work that goes into all the projects and programs that are creating this information in the first place. We're actually taking that forward, hopefully, if we can get a mandate for it, as part of what we call the Direct Electronic Incident Transfer Program, or project rather, which would develop something similar to an XML schema maybe.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Okay. I think the point is very, very valid. There's work already about trying to understand what people mean by different language. So again, amongst the complex array of stakeholders involved in response, people use the same word to describe different things. That's a fundamental issue across organisations as it is. And again, the Emergency Planning College have developed what we're calling a lexicon of language involved in response to try to make sure that the meaning is the same for the word, regardless of the organisation in which you sit in. I think there's even that level of complexity in that as well. With regards to standards, I think that is a way that I think we're slowly moving to, particularly in policing, that some of that has already been articulated with regards to command and control logs and that type of thing, so that information can be shared across forces. But yes, there is the extra level of sharing that across not just same organisations, but same types of organisation, but wider than that. With regards to procurement, with some of that type of those arrangements are already in place. So there are people are starting to have those types of conversations and make those types of contracts for policing rather than organisation specific. But again, I think there's still probably more work to do there.
Great. And the last point to John, and then we'll have lunch.
I have the last time before lunch, so I've got about 40 minutes to say this now, so I'm very sorry about your sandwiches. But I think it's just a final comment from me, which is about don't lock yourself into doing things the way you've always done it. The world is moving around you very quickly. It's not, for me, about the challenges of one piece of technology against another, because they will develop and they always will. The challenge is, can you link the two technologies together? And I think the trick for companies these days is to be able to say, I will develop a command process by which, but I can link it into something else. And that is the process of being able to be flexible about it. And it will change and it will go on for years. And you're right, 5, 10 years, things will move on fantastically. I hope they do, because by that time I'll be retired and you'll be informing me then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, in fact, this issue of standardization is something we want to pick up later, because I think it is not to be locked in, because we do need to move on. Okay, lunch is next door. Can I ask you to...
I can't stay with you, but enjoy.
Thank you. To be back by 1:20, please, for the afternoon session. Thank you. And thank you all very much indeed.